chunking sentences, which is the first thing we're going to learn in sentence composing. When children are learning to read, they learn to chunk sentences. This means that instead of reading one word at a time, they learn to read groups of words together or chunks of the sentence. These sentence chunks fit together like the pieces of a puzzle. First, let's look at an example from the book The Witch of Blackbird Pond. First, I'm going to read it one word at a time. The idea of cutting and sewing a dress by herself was novel and exciting. And that's how an inexperienced reader might read that sentence. It sounded a bit awkward, more like a robot than a person. Here's how we could chunk that sentence when we read it. And I'm going to use these red lines to divide the sentence into chunks. So the idea of cutting and sewing a dress by herself was novel and exciting. The idea of cutting and sewing a dress by herself was novel and exciting. So good readers read sentences in chunks, but good writers also write sentences in chunks or pieces rather than word by word. But how do we know where the chunks are? What distinguishes one part of a sentence from another? What makes them different? The most important thing is that the chunks have to be meaningful. Related words must stick together. So we're going to look at what that means by looking at an example from the book Animorphs, The Invasion by K.A. Applegate, which you see in front of you. And here we are given two different ways to chunk this sentence. We need to decide which one of the two sentences is chunked correctly in a meaningful way. So our first clue is going to be looking at our adjectives and adverbs. And I'm going to remind you that an adjective is a word that is used to describe a noun. So in our chunks, we want to keep our adjectives with the nouns that they describe. So let's look at our example. The words gray-green and slimy are both adjectives that describe the word thing. So we want to keep all of those words together in the same chunk. They are a chunk of meaning. Now let's look at the second sentence. I see gray, green, and slimy are together. However, thing is in a separate chunk. So I already have a clue that this one is the one that's correct and this one is the one that is incorrect. But we're going to keep looking at how we can tell using other clues. A second way we can tell is by looking at commas. Commas often separate chunks. They mark a pause for the reader to let him or her know that a new part of the sentence is coming. So we can see that we have a comma after the word shall, and that separates for us a new chunk that begins with the word only, and a comma here that also separates the new chunk. Looking pretty good. Let's look at our second example. Unfortunately here, a comma does not separate the new chunk, and here the comma does not separate the new chunk. So I have another sign that number 1 is correct, and number 2 is not. There's one more way we're going to look at today of how we could separate our chunks, and they are prepositions. So prepositions are special words that link nouns, pronouns, and phrases to a sentence. Prepositions often mark the beginning of a new chunk of the sentence. And we're going to learn more about prepositions in the second section of sentence composing. But for now, here are some common prepositions that you will want to know. So these are words such as about, among, around, beside. And you can see the other examples here. For now, I want you to just focus on 2 specific examples that fit the sentence we are working with, which are like and without. So let's look back at our sentence and see if we can find those 2 prepositions. like and without. And we find that the first preposition is right here, and just as it should, it starts a new chunk. And then here we have without, which also starts a new chunk. So this is looking pretty good. And if I go down here, seems like I have a problem. And then there's no new chunk there, and unfortunately there's no new chunk before without. So after looking at these three different factors, I know that the correct answer to this question is number 1. Now that probably seems like a lot of work to go through, to look to see if there's adjectives and adverbs and commas and prepositions. But as you get more experience with this, it will become a lot easier, and you'll just be able to do it automatically. So let's read number 1, the way it's trumped correctly. It says, I saw a gray-green slimy thing like a snail, without its shell, only bigger, the size of a rat, which is certainly something I would never want to see. A snail the size of a rat. Ugh. So in the first unit of sentence composing, you practice chunking sentences correctly, which is what we just showed. I also want to show you how to unscramble and combine sentence parts so that when you get to this part of the unit, it will be much easier for you. So in each practice, you get a model sentence. And in this case, this one's from the Velveteen Rabbit. And it's when a child loves you for a long, long time, you become real. Let's highlight our prepositions. When. So when tells us when something is happening. And if we look at our sentence parts that we're going to unscramble and combine, which are the gorillas became worried as the tiger chased Tarzan with fast, fast strides. And we want to put these in a new order so that they match the form of the model sentence. So I start with when, a preposition that tells when something is happening. And if I look at B, as will tell me what's happening as the tiger is doing something. So let's highlight it here too. So that's how I knew, one of the ways that I knew that as the tiger was the first part of my new sentence. Now what is the tiger doing? Well, the tiger is chasing Tarzan. So as the tiger chased. And if we look up here, when a child loves, so the child is loving, the tiger is chasing. And then we want to say what's happening while the tiger is chasing. So as the tiger chased Tarzan with fast, fast strides, the gorillas became worried. Now I want to point out something very important, which is if I look at my model sentence, I'll see I have a comma after a long, long time. But I don't have a comma after strides, but I do have one here. And what this means is when you're combining these sentence parts, you need to really look and pay attention to when you need to capitalize letters, such as an as for the beginning of a sentence, and when you need to add commas, just like you did here, because the sentence parts need to match the model sentence. And I also want you to notice the period at the end, because you do need to end your sentence with a period. So make sure as you're doing these exercises that you're also adding those commas and those periods and capitalizing those letters as necessary.